Welcome back to the fourth day of the Darla Sewalong. Today is all about the zip back view. So if you are sewing up one of the tie back views, you can skip today and come back for tomorrow. Like I said, we will be inserting our invisible zipper, so make sure you have that handy. It needs to be at least as long as recommended on the pattern, but it can be longer because we will be shortening it. Now the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our invisible zipper and unzip it, and we're going to gently press the zipper coils open. Make sure that you're using an iron set to low heat. If your iron is too hot, it will melt the plastic zipper coils. Zip your zipper back up, and then go ahead and grab either your dress or your jumpsuit, and you're going to place the zipper face down on top of the center back seam that is basted together, with the zipper stop about 5/8 of an inch down from the upper raw edge of the bodice. And then you're going to pin through both the zipper tape and the seam allowances only in multiple places. Now the first place I always pin is at the waist seam, because this is kind of the most important point. We want to make sure that is lined up perfectly. So once again, you're only pinning through the seam allowance and the zipper tape, not the main bodice or skirt or pant part of the jumpsuit or dress. So once again, kind of pin this every couple inches, pin pretty generously. This is how we're going to make sure that everything stays lined up once we do sew in our invisible zipper. This is also a really good way to make sure that your zipper tape doesn't get twisted at all. If you've ever inserted an invisible zipper before, you know that it can be really mind-boggling to know, what side of what zipper tape goes to what part of the back of your dress or your jumpsuit. So I really like pinning it this way because it's just really easy to visualize how the zipper tape is going to be sewn in. All this being said, if you have a method for inserting an invisible zipper that is different than mine, that works well for you, feel free to use that. This is just the way that I like to do it, and it's the way that I've just had the best results. Okay, now that everything is pinned in place, we are going to actually unpick the basting stitches. So that is from the top of the bodice down to that dot. We basted this together yesterday, but we are going to keep the pins in when we do this. Now you can do this either from the front of your jumpsuit or dress. I usually kind of switch back between the front and then also the underside. Sometimes it's easier if you're unpicking it from the wrong side to kind of tell where the basting ends and where the dot and the real stitching begins. Okay, now that that is all unpicked, we are going to actually unzip our zipper, and then we're going to go over to our sewing machine and we're going to switch our presser foot from a regular presser foot to an invisible zipper foot. Now I do know, or I've heard that some people use a regular zipper foot for this and it works just fine. I've actually never tried that, so feel free to Google that if you want, but according to this pattern, we're just assuming that you own and that you're going to use an invisible zipper foot. I actually usually like to baste this stitching along the edge of the zipper first. This is for a couple reasons. One is it just helps me make sure that everything is lined up before I stitch the regular stitch length, but it also helps me to make sure that I am stitching close enough to the zipper teeth, and so that the zipper is in fact invisible on the right side of your jumpsuit or dress. Okay, so I am switching out my presser foot here for my invisible zipper foot, and then I'm also increasing my stitch length to a basting stitch. And then I also usually like to move my needle over just one space, either to the left or the right, depending on which side of the zipper that I'm sewing. And this once again just helps me stitch just a little bit closer to those zipper teeth so that it really is invisible on the right side of the garment. Now, one more thing to keep in mind, you actually will not be able to sew all the way down to the dot at the center back. You're going to get as close as possible, probably within about an inch, but because of the width of the invisible zipper foot, you just won't be able to sew all the way, and that's okay. We will take care of that in the next step. Okay, so it should look something like this once it is sewn in. Now go ahead and zip up your zipper and just make sure once again that everything is lined up. I especially like to check my waist seam to make sure that that is lined up. That's kind of the most important part. Just make sure that there's no puckering or anything, just kind of at the bottom of the zipper. And if we're happy with how everything looks, and I feel like I'm happy enough, I feel like my waist seam is maybe like a teeny bit off, but I'm going to call that good because this is a little bit of a busier print. If you're not happy with it, you should adjust it while it's still in this basting stage so that it does line up perfectly. And then once you're happy with the way it all looks, then you're going to go over to your sewing machine and you're going to do those same steps with the invisible zipper foot, and you are going to stitch in a regular zip length. The other thing that I'm also checking at this point is just to make sure once again that that zipper is invisible on the outside of the garment. If it is not, then you're going to want to stitch just even a teeny bit closer to those zipper teeth on this second time around. Okay, my invisible zipper is all the way inserted at this point. I'm going to zip that up, and at this point I do like to give it a nice little press that kind of helps flatten those coils back out and also just kind of sets the stitches in place. Now, like I mentioned before, you are going to have just this little gap here in your stitching between the dot and how far you were able to get down in your stitching when you were using the invisible zipper foot. So we're going to take care of that now. We're going to turn our dress or jumpsuit inside out so that we can see the stitching. And then we are going to actually switch our presser foot from an invisible zipper foot over to a regular zipper foot. And that will just allow us to get really close to those zipper teeth on the side here. And we are going to do a line of stitching, back stitching at both ends, that connects that dot with the bottom of the stitching from the zipper. Now, if this feels tricky, and I do feel like this can feel a little bit tricky, you can also hand stitch this. It's just about an inch of stitching, like I said, so pretty easy to do just with a needle and thread as well. Okay, so it should look something like this when it's done. Our entire center back seam is now stitched in entirety. Okay, now the last thing that we need to do before we're done with the zipper part is to shorten our zipper tape. So go ahead and zip up your zipper and then turn your jumpsuit or your dress inside out. So right below the area where we stitched your zipper to your dress or jumpsuit, we are going to do a zigzag stitch on top of the zipper teeth. We're going to go over to our sewing machine and switch back first to just a regular presser foot, and then we're going to switch over to the zigzag stitch setting, and the width should be about 5 millimeters and the length should be about 0.5 millimeters. And then you'll just stitch back and forth over those zipper teeth multiple times just below that stitching. And then once you've done that quite a few times, we're actually going to just trim the zipper below that zigzag stitching that you just made, and then your zipper will be shortened. Okay, now let's move on to finishing our bodice. So grab each of your straps, and with right sides touching, you are going to line up the ends of the straps with the top of the bodice. So the front one is going to be at that front notch, and the back of the strap is going to be lined up with the top of the seam where the two back pieces meet. Make sure that you are not twisting your strap when you're doing this. And then go ahead and pin those in place, and then we will go over to our sewing machine and we'll just kind of base those in place so that they stay put during the next few steps. And I do recommend basting those about 3/8 of an inch from the top raw edge so that you don't have to worry about removing those basting stitches later once you have sewn the top of your bodice together. Next, grab your bodice lining that is all assembled, and then you're going to press the bottom edge of the bodice lining up, wrong sides touching, by 3/8 of an inch. Okay, next go ahead and unzip the zipper on your main dress or jumpsuit, and with right sides touching, we're going to pin the top edges of the main bodice and the bodice lining together. Should of course be matching up the notches and then also just matching those seams. The other thing that you need to note is that the zipper tape and the seam allowance on the main bodice should be extended out. And then we're going to go over to our sewing machine and we are going to sew that entire top edge at a normal 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, so it should look something like this. Now go ahead and zip up your zipper. This is just to make sure that the top edges line up along that seam. If they are off, then you are going to want to go over to your sewing machine and, just sew down a little bit more just so that they are even on both sides. One thing I just want to note here is this is actually a really good time to do a fit check of your dress or your jumpsuit. Once we've completely sewed down the lining, it's going to be really hard to access the straps and the side seams. So if you need to make any adjustments to those, let's do that now. There are just a couple little areas along the top of that bodice that are a little bit curved. Most of the top of the bodice is straight, but those little areas that are kind of curved right here at the underarm along the front, we're going to go ahead and notch those, and that's just going to make sure that once we have sewn and then pressed the lining away from the main bodice, that's just like a really smooth transition and that you don't get any bumps in there. And if your seam allowances overall just seem a little bit bulky, you can also grade these seam allowances down. I like to keep quite a bit of structure along the top of my bodice just so that it doesn't stretch out, and also it just has to hold a lot of weight with the straps. So I err on not grading it, but once again, if your fabric is really bulky, you can do that. Okay, now we're going to start preparing for understitching the lining of the bodice. So in preparation, we are going to do a little bit of pressing here. So we are going to press the lining away from the bodice and over the seam allowances. So once again, the lining and the seam allowances, including the seam allowances of the straps, are all pressed up and away from the main bodice. So do that all the way along the entire top of the bodice. And then we're going to understitch by doing a line of stitching really close to that seam where the main and the lining bodice meet, and you're stitching both through the lining and all of those seam allowances. This is just going to help keep that lining tucked to the inside of your bodice and so that it's not flipping out while you're wearing it. Okay, now we're going to enclose the center back edges. So you're going to take the lining and pull it down with right sides touching. You're going to line up the center back edges of the bodice lining and the main bodice and the zipper and pin that in place. Now that bottom folded edge of the lining, so just barely cover the waist seam. Okay, now once those are both pinned, we're going to go over to our sewing machine once again, and I like to use a regular zipper foot for this, although you can probably get away with a regular presser foot as well. And we are going to do a line of stitching through all of those layers about 1/8 of an inch in from the zipper. You don't want to stitch too close to the zipper, otherwise the fabric, the extra fabric of the lining, will get caught in the zipper when you're trying to zip it up and down. Okay, so it should look something like this when you're done stitching. Now, if that corner is really bulky, you can trim it down. I don't usually find that it's necessary because it's such a small seam allowance. But then you're going to turn that corner right side out, so essentially turning the bodice right side out at this point. And then go ahead and give everything a pretty good press, pressing that top edge as well as the stitching that you just did along the zipper. Okay, and now we are going to stitch in the ditch, catching the lining underneath to attach the lining fully to the rest of the jumpsuit or the dress. Now, if you are more particular, if maybe your fabric is going to show any kind of imperfections, you can also hand stitch this, and that'll give you just like a little bit more of an upscale finish. But my fabric is pretty busy and I'm a little bit lazy right now, so we are going to go ahead and stitch in the ditch. So you're going to pin the entire bottom folded edge of the bodice lining so it just covers the seam where the main bodice meets the skirt or pant. Now, I actually like to use a glue stick for this. If you followed me for a long time, you know this, but if that makes you nervous for some reason, then go ahead and just pin it like normal. Okay, so once you're sure that that folded edge is covering that seam, we're going to go to the right side of our jumpsuit or our dress, and we are going to stitch in the ditch. So that means doing a line of stitching in that crevice that is created by the waist seam. And because we made sure that the folded edge of the lining was placed past that seam, it should just catch the edge of the lining underneath as we're sewing. Now, a couple things just to be extra careful of: make sure that you're back stitching at both ends, and also be extra careful that you are not sewing through your zipper teeth. So I usually start and stop about 1/8 of an inch from the zipper teeth just to make sure I don't catch any stitching in the zipper teeth. Otherwise, you will not be able to zip up or zip down your zipper, which would be very frustrating. Okay, so it should look something like this on the inside, and then hopefully the stitching on the outside is pretty much invisible. Now at this point, if you would like, you could also hand sew on a hook and eye at the top of your zipper. I'll be honest, I don't really find that this is necessary. I think it's the traditional way to do it, but when I try on my jumpsuits and my dresses, I find that the zipper, isn't pulling or anything, so I'm going to opt not to do that because I think it looks cleaner without it. But if you'd like to, you can add that at this time. And that is it for today. So tomorrow is going to be jumping over to the tie back version of the Darla. If you are doing the zip back version like I am, you can skip the next couple days and circle back on Friday.